In 2009, the President of the United States walked into the White House, clutching a device he refused to give up. The Secret Service had wanted to take it from him. Security officials were horrified. No president had ever been allowed to carry such a thing into office. But Barack Obama fought to keep it, and he won, and the image went around the world. The most powerful man on the planet, addicted to his phone. That phone was a BlackBerry. For a few short years, the BlackBerry was not just a product, it was a symbol of power, of importance, of being the kind of person whose emails could not wait. Wall Street bankers lived on them. Lawyers, executives, politicians, celebrities, all of them thumbing away at those tiny plastic keyboards, day and night, so compulsively that people gave the device a nickname. The Crackberry, because you could not put it down. At its peak, the company behind it controlled a huge share of the smartphone market. It had tens of millions of devoted users. Its brand was synonymous with serious, professional, secure mobile communication. Governments trusted it. Banks trusted it. The most important institutions in the world ran on it. The company was worth, at its height, well over $80 billion. And then, in a span of just a few years, it almost completely vanished. The market share fell from dominance to nearly zero. The company's value collapsed by tens of billions of dollars. The keyboards went silent. Today, the company no longer makes phones at all. Here is the part that should haunt every leader who hears it. BlackBerry did not lose because it was slow, or poor, or technologically incapable. When the device that would destroy it arrived, BlackBerry's leaders held it in their hands, examined it, and reached a confident conclusion. They decided it was not a real threat. They decided it was, in essence, a toy, a flashy gadget for consumers that serious professionals would never depend on. They were the experts. They owned the market. They knew, with total certainty, what a real smartphone was. And they looked directly at the future, and they laughed at it. This is the story of how the most powerful name in mobile communication was destroyed by a fundamental misunderstanding, not of technology, but of what business it was actually in. This is not the story of a company that was outbuilt. This is the story of a company that was outthought. My name is unimportant. What matters is the body on the table. And today, the body is BlackBerry. Let's begin the autopsy. To understand how far BlackBerry fell, you first have to understand how it had quietly conquered the most valuable customers in the world. The company did not begin life called BlackBerry. It began as a Canadian technology firm called Research in Motion, or RIM, founded in 1984 in Waterloo, Ontario, by a brilliant and intense engineer named Mike Lazaridis. Lazaridis was a true technologist, a man obsessed with wireless data at a time when almost no one understood what it could become. And he saw something most people missed. In the 1990s, everyone was thinking about voice, about the mobile phone as a way to talk. Lazaridis was thinking about data, about sending information wirelessly to a device in your pocket. Specifically, he became obsessed with one application that would change the working world forever: email. In 1999, RIM released the first BlackBerry. And it was not really a phone at all. It was a wireless email machine. A small device with a screen and, crucially, a tiny keyboard that could send and receive email anywhere, instantly, securely. For the first time, a business person could be away from their desk and still be connected to their inbox in real time. The genius of it was not just the hardware. It was the entire invisible system behind it. RIM built a technology that pushed email to the device the instant it arrived, automatically, without the user having to do anything to fetch it. Today, this sounds trivial. Every phone does it. But at the time, it was close to magical. Your messages simply appeared, wherever you were, the moment they were sent, with the reliability of a heartbeat. And RIM ran this through its own secure network operations centers, which meant the company controlled the entire chain, end to end, from the sender to the little device buzzing in your pocket. This was why it was so secure, so reliable, and so efficient with the scarce wireless data of the era. It was a closed, controlled, beautifully engineered system, and for its purpose, nothing on Earth came close. To understand why this was revolutionary, you have to remember the world it entered. Before BlackBerry, to check your email, you had to be at a computer. When you left the office, you were gone, disconnected. The BlackBerry severed that chain. Suddenly, the executive in the back of a taxi, the lawyer in an airport lounge, the banker at his child's soccer game, could all stay connected to the flow of business at every moment. For the people who ran the world, this was not a convenience. It was a transformation. And BlackBerry built its empire on 3 pillars that made it utterly dominant among serious professionals. The first pillar was the keyboard. That physical, tactile, beautifully engineered keyboard. BlackBerry users could type long, complex emails at extraordinary speed, with their thumbs, without looking. For people whose entire job was communication, this was sacred. The keyboard was not a feature, it was a religion. The second pillar was security. BlackBerry built an entire infrastructure, its own secure servers, its own encrypted network, that routed messages with a level of safety that governments and corporations found irresistible. When security mattered above all else, BlackBerry was the only answer. This is why the White House, the banks, and the law firms were locked in. The third pillar was efficiency. BlackBerry devices were ruthlessly optimized for their purpose. They sipped battery power. They used very little of the precious, expensive wireless data of the era. They were reliable workhorses, built to do one thing: communication, better than anything else on Earth. By the mid-2000s, RIM was a juggernaut. Its devices were everywhere that power gathered. It had tens of millions of subscribers. Its profits soared. Its stock made the founders and early investors immensely wealthy. The company was the pride of Canada, a rare technology titan born outside Silicon Valley. And it had achieved something almost no product ever does. It had become a status symbol that doubled as an addiction. To pull out a BlackBerry in a meeting in 2006 was to announce, without a word, that you were important, that you were busy, that somewhere an email was waiting that only you could answer. The little red light that blinked when a new message arrived trained its users like a slot machine. A flash of the light, a hit of importance, a compulsive glance, all day and all night. People checked them at dinner tables, in movie theaters, in bed, at funerals. Relationships strained around them. The nickname BlackBerry was not marketing. It was a confession, repeated by millions, about a device they genuinely could not stop touching. Think about what that means for a company. BlackBerry had not just captured a market, it had captured a behavior, a habit so deep it changed how an entire professional class lived. When you have that, you feel invincible. Because how could anyone ever pry this device out of the hands of people who are physically addicted to it? Loyalty this deep felt like a fortress that no competitor could ever storm. But there is a hidden danger in that kind of loyalty, and BlackBerry would learn it the hardest way possible. An addiction is not the same as love. People were not devoted to the BlackBerry because they cherished it. They were chained to it because it was the only thing that fed their need to stay connected. And the moment something arrived that fed that same need better, and fed 100 other needs besides, the chains would not just loosen, they would shatter all at once, because there had never been real love holding them in the first place. There had only been dependence, and dependence transfers instantly to whatever serves it better. This was the summit. RIM stood at the top of the professional mobile world, holding 3 pillars it believed were unbreakable: the keyboard, the security, the efficiency. It did not yet understand that all 3 pillars were about to become irrelevant, and that the company's deep belief in them would become the very thing that destroyed it. In January 2007, Steve Jobs stood on a stage in San Francisco and unveiled the iPhone. And the leaders of RIM, watching from Waterloo, were not afraid. They were skeptical, and in their skepticism lay the seed of their destruction. Because when the engineers at RIM looked at the iPhone, they did not see the future. They saw a list of problems, and every problem they saw was real. The iPhone had no physical keyboard. To men who had built an empire on the sacred tactile keyboard, this was absurd. How could any serious person type real emails all day on a flat sheet of glass? It was, to them, obviously inferior. A step backward. The iPhone's battery life was poor. It needed charging far more often than a frugal BlackBerry. To a company that prized efficiency above almost everything, this was a glaring weakness. The iPhone was a voracious consumer of data. Its rich web browser and graphics demanded enormous amounts of bandwidth. So much that RIM's engineers reportedly doubted the cellular networks of the time could even handle millions of such devices without collapsing. From an engineering standpoint, the iPhone looked reckless, inefficient, almost irresponsible. And the iPhone was, by the standards RIM used, insecure. It was an open, consumer-focused device, not the locked-down, encrypted fortress that corporations and governments demanded. So the leaders of RIM looked at the iPhone, measured it against everything they knew to be true about smartphones, and reached a conclusion that felt not arrogant but obvious. The iPhone was a beautiful toy, a flashy consumer gadget. It would sell to people who wanted to play with the internet and listen to music. But it was no threat to BlackBerry's real business, the serious, professional, secure communication that ran the institutions of the world. They were not entirely wrong about the device. They were catastrophically wrong about the war. Because here is what RIM failed to understand. the misjudgment that sits at the very center of this autopsy. RIM thought it was in the business of secure, efficient mobile email for professionals. It thought its competition was about keyboards, battery life, and encryption. But the iPhone was not competing on those things. The iPhone had quietly changed what a phone was for. It was not a communication tool. It was a pocket computer, a device for the entire internet, for apps, for media, for everything. That also happened to handle email and calls. Apple was not making a better BlackBerry. Apple was making the BlackBerry irrelevant by making the entire category of communication device obsolete and replacing it with something vastly larger. And the customers, even the serious professional ones, were about to discover that they did not want a device that was merely good at email. They wanted everything. And once they could hold everything in one hand, a device that only did email beautifully would feel like a relic. The ground had shifted, and RIM, standing proudly on its 3 pillars, did not feel it move. Before we follow the body further down, I want to ask you something directly. If you find this kind of autopsy valuable, if you want to understand not just that great companies die, but the exact decision, in the exact room, that kills them, then subscribe to this channel. Every episode, we lay one fallen empire on the table, and we find the true cause of death. It costs you nothing, and it ensures the next examination finds its way to you. Now, back to the body. For a little while, RIM's confidence looked justified. The first iPhone did have real weaknesses. Its typing was slower. Its battery did drain. Its security was not enterprise grade. And in the immediate aftermath of its launch, BlackBerry actually kept growing. Its sales rose. Its subscriber numbers climbed. For a couple of years, it looked as though both could coexist. The iPhone for consumers, the BlackBerry for professionals. This is one of the cruelest traps in all of business, and we have seen it on this table before. The early success, after the threat appears, is not proof that you are safe. It is the anesthesia before the amputation. The old business keeps growing on momentum, on existing contracts, on loyal customers who have not yet switched, even as the foundation beneath it is being washed away. The numbers look fine right up until the moment they fall off a cliff. And then came the 2 forces that turned the iPhone from a toy into a weapon aimed directly at BlackBerry's heart. The first was the App Store, which Apple launched in 2008. This changed everything. Suddenly, the iPhone was not a fixed device with a fixed set of functions. It was a platform, a blank canvas onto which hundreds of thousands of developers poured every conceivable application. Games, tools, banking, maps, social networks, productivity, entertainment. The iPhone could become anything, and every month it became more. BlackBerry had no real answer to this. Its devices were built to do a few things superbly, not to be an infinite platform for everything. Its app ecosystem was thin, clumsy, and unloved by developers. While Apple's canvas filled with a universe of software, BlackBerry's stayed nearly empty. The second force was Android. Just as with Nokia, Google's free operating system arrived and spread across the entire industry, powering devices from Samsung and a dozen other manufacturers. Now, BlackBerry was not facing one competitor. It was facing 2 enormous, fast-growing ecosystems, Apple and Android, both offering full pocket computers with vast app libraries, both improving at a furious pace, and both steadily fixing the very weaknesses that RIM had been so smug about. The touchscreen keyboards got better. The batteries improved, and crucially, the security improved too, until good enough security on an iPhone, combined with everything else it could do, beat perfect security on a BlackBerry that could do little else. And then came the development that drove the final nail. It was called, in the world of corporate technology, bring your own device. It is worth slowing down on exactly how this fortress fell, because it is one of the most instructive deaths in business history. BlackBerry's stronghold was the enterprise, the corporate IT department. And that stronghold had a particular logic. In the old world, the company chose the technology, and the employee used what they were given. IT departments loved BlackBerry because it was secure, manageable, and controllable. The employee's preference simply did not enter into it. This was BlackBerry's deepest moat. As long as the people who bought the phones in bulk, corporate IT, preferred BlackBerry, the millions of individual employees were locked in, whether they liked it or not. But the iPhone and Android did something no competitor had ever managed. They attacked the fortress from the inside. Employees fell in love with these devices in their personal lives. For the apps, the web, the camera, the sheer pleasure of using them. And then they came to work and resented the dull corporate BlackBerry in their other pocket. They did not want to carry two phones. They began to push, to lobby, to demand that they be allowed to use their own iPhones for work email. At first, IT departments resisted, citing security. But the pressure was relentless and came from every level, including the executives at the very top who wanted their shiny new iPhones too. One by one, companies relented. They built systems to allow personal phones onto corporate networks. And the moment they did, the single thing keeping BlackBerry alive in the enterprise, the IT department's exclusive choice, evaporated. BlackBerry had built a fortress with the gates facing outward against competitors. It never imagined the attack would come from within, from its own users, carried in willingly through the front door. The most loyal-seeming customers in the world turned out to be a conquering army, and they were already inside the walls. The professionals, the very people RIM was certain would never abandon the keyboard and the secure network, looked at what an iPhone could do, and they left. The crackberry addiction was cured the moment something better appeared. Now, I have to be fair, because a true autopsy does not flatter the prosecution. RIM did not simply sit still and do nothing. When the danger finally became undeniable, the company panicked and thrashed and tried, and its attempts to save itself reveal the depth of the trap it was in. RIM's first real attempts to respond were frankly embarrassing. It rushed out a touchscreen phone meant to compete with the iPhone, and it was widely seen as clumsy and disappointing. A product built by a company that did not truly understand the new world it was trying to enter. It was trying to copy the iPhone while still being BlackBerry, and it satisfied no one. Then RIM made an even stranger move. It launched a tablet to compete with Apple's iPad. But the tablet shipped without one of the most basic functions imaginable. It could not even properly handle email on its own at launch, without being tethered to a BlackBerry phone. Think about that. The company that had invented mobile email released a device that could not do mobile email properly. It was a symbol of an organization that had lost its way, chasing competitors into markets it did not understand, while neglecting the very thing it had once done better than anyone. And underneath these failures was a deeper, structural problem at the very top of the company. Because RIM was run, unusually, by two co-chief executives, Mike Lazaridis, the brilliant engineer who loved the technology and especially the keyboard, and Jim Balsillie, the aggressive businessman focused on deals and markets. For years, this partnership had worked, but in a moment of crisis, when the company desperately needed a single, clear, decisive vision to navigate a terrifying new landscape, it had two leaders, two worldviews, and a structure that made bold, unified change extraordinarily difficult. The company that needed to turn fastest was steered by two hands on the wheel, not always pulling in the same direction. By the time RIM truly understood what it was facing, it was years too late. It eventually rebranded itself as BlackBerry and bet its survival on a new, modern operating system and a new line of phones. And the technology, when it finally arrived, was actually decent. But decent and far too late is not a strategy. The market had already chosen. The apps were already on Apple and Android. The customers had already switched. The world had already moved on. A good BlackBerry in 2013 was like a brilliant telegram service in the age of the telephone. The quality no longer mattered, because the entire game had changed. I want to pause the timeline here, because this is the part of the autopsy that matters most. Not what BlackBerry did, why it did it. And BlackBerry's why is different from every giant we have examined so far. And understanding that difference is the entire value of this examination. Blockbuster died of comfort with a profitable present. Kodak died of love for a profitable past. Nokia died of arrogant certainty and one catastrophic bet. But BlackBerry died of something subtler and, in some ways, more frightening, because it can fool even the smartest people in the room. BlackBerry died of expertise. It died of being too good at understanding its own business, a business that had quietly ceased to exist. Let me show you the three forces that actually killed it. The first force was the trap of defining your business too narrowly. RIM believed it was in the business of secure, efficient mobile communication, and it was the undisputed world champion at exactly that. The problem is that customers never actually wanted secure, efficient communication as an end in itself. They wanted to be connected to everything that mattered to them. For a while, email was most of what mattered, so BlackBerry won. But when a device arrived that connected people to everything, the whole internet, every app, all media, and their email too, the narrow definition became a coffin. RIM was answering a question the market had stopped asking. It was the best in the world at a job that was disappearing. When you define your business by what you make, instead of by what your customer is truly trying to achieve, you become an expert in your own obsolescence. The second force was the curse of expert judgment. This is the most dangerous force of all, because it disguises itself as wisdom. RIM's leaders were not fools looking at the iPhone. They were the most knowledgeable smartphone experts on Earth, and their criticisms of the iPhone were technically correct. The battery was worse, the typing was slower, the security was weaker, the data demands were heavier. Every single point was true. And being right about all the details is exactly what blinded them to the one thing that mattered. They were so expert at evaluating the iPhone as a phone that they could not see it was not a phone. Deep expertise in the old paradigm is often the very thing that prevents you from recognizing a new one. The more of an expert you are, the more confidently and the more wrongly you can dismiss the thing that will replace you. The third force was divided and conflicted leadership in the face of disruption. The two CEO structure, a strength in stable times, became a fatal weakness when the company needed one clear vision and the courage to burn down its own assumptions. The man who loved the keyboard could not easily lead the company away from the keyboard, the organization's deepest emotional and financial commitments, to the keyboard, to the secure network, to the enterprise customer, were precisely the things it needed to abandon, and the people at the top were the least able to abandon them, because those things were their identity and their legend. Narrow definition, expert blindness, and divided leadership. That is the specific disease that killed this specific giant. And notice the pattern beneath all four bodies we have now examined. The illness wears a different mask each time. Comfort, nostalgia, arrogance, expertise. But underneath, it is always the same sickness, the inability to honestly confront a changing world, while there is still time to change with it. The strengths that made you great, clutched too tightly, becoming the chains that drag you down. Now, let us watch the empire fall. The collapse, when it fully arrived, was staggering in both its speed and its completeness. BlackBerry's share of the smartphone market, which had once made it a dominant force, began to slide and then to plummet. From a commanding position, it fell through the teens, into single digits, and then toward fractions of a percent. In the world's most important and fastest-growing technology market, the former king became a rounding error. The tens of millions of users drifted away, year after year, lured by the endless capabilities of the iPhone and Android, until the once mighty subscriber base had withered to a fraction of its peak. The financial damage was immense. The company's market value, which had soared above $80 billion at its height, collapsed by tens of billions. The stock that had created fortunes destroyed them just as quickly. The company took enormous write-downs on unsold inventory, warehouses full of phones that the world no longer wanted. Thousands upon thousands of employees lost their jobs as the company shrank again and again, trying to find a size at which it could survive. The two co-CEOs, the partnership that had built the empire, eventually stepped down. Their era ended. New leadership came in to try to manage the decline, to find some way to keep the company alive. And in a final, quiet admission of defeat, BlackBerry eventually stopped making its own phones altogether. The company that had created the smartphone category for professionals, that had put the world's most powerful people on those tiny keyboards, that had been so iconic it earned a nickname for its own addictiveness, simply exited the business it had invented. The company did not vanish entirely. It survived, transformed, by pivoting to software and cybersecurity, using some of the very security expertise that had once been a pillar of its empire. In that narrow sense, a piece of BlackBerry lives on. But the empire, the phones, the dominance, the cultural icon, the $80 billion giant that the President of the United States refused to part with. All of that was gone. To grasp the speed of it, consider this. The iPhone launched in 2007. For 2 more years, BlackBerry kept growing, and in 2009, it reached the very peak of its power and influence, the year the president fought to keep his. And then, from that summit, the fall took only a handful of years. By the early 2010s, the slide had become a rout, and by the middle of the decade, the phones were effectively finished. A company that had taken 25 years to build its empire watched the heart of that empire dissolve in roughly 5. That is the terrifying tempo of disruption in the modern age. Empires that took decades to build can be gutted in the time it takes a child to start and finish elementary school. The slowness with which giants change is no match for the speed at which the ground can move beneath them. And there is a final, quiet irony in the ruins. BlackBerry's last and most enduring value turned out to be the one pillar everyone had forgotten about: security. The keyboard died. The hardware died. The brand as a phone maker died. But the deep institutional expertise in keeping data safe, the thing that had locked in governments and banks decades earlier, became the foundation of the smaller, humbler software company that survived. The empire was gone, but a single one of its old strengths, repurposed, was just enough to keep a shadow of the company breathing. It is the kind of detail that makes these autopsies feel less like business stories and more like tragedies. The dying giant clutching, at the very end, the one thing it had nearly forgotten it was good at. So what killed BlackBerry? The comfortable answer is the iPhone, or the touchscreen, or that technology simply moved on. That is the answer that lets every executive watching this sleep soundly tonight, because it makes BlackBerry's death feel like an act of nature. A bigger predator arrived, and the smaller one died. Nothing to be done. But you have seen the evidence yourself, and the evidence tells a different and far more unsettling story. BlackBerry was not killed by failing to see the iPhone. Its leaders saw it clearly, examined it closely, and understood its every technical weakness in detail. BlackBerry was not killed by a lack of resources. At the moment the iPhone arrived, BlackBerry was a dominant, wealthy, growing company with tens of millions of loyal customers and a brand that meant power itself. BlackBerry was not killed by an inability to build technology. It had built the most sophisticated mobile communication system in the world. Even its final doomed phones were technically competent. What killed BlackBerry was a judgment, a confident, expert, deeply reasoned judgment that the iPhone was a toy and the keyboard was forever. That the business it had always been in was the business it would always be in. The cause of death was not a failure to see, it was a failure to understand what it was seeing. The most knowledgeable smartphone experts on the planet looked directly at the future and, precisely because of their expertise, mistook it for a fad. And like every giant on this table, BlackBerry did not die from a single moment. It died from a single conviction, held too long. The conviction that it knew, better than anyone, what a smartphone was, and the world's quiet refusal to agree. There is a lesson here, and it is the same dark thread that runs through every body we lay on this table. The thing that makes you powerful is almost always the thing that kills you. BlackBerry's mastery of secure mobile email made it the king of the professional world, and then made it unable to imagine that professionals wanted anything more. Its beloved keyboard was its signature genius, and then became the anchor it could not release. Its deep engineering expertise let it judge the iPhone's every flaw with precision, and that very precision blinded it to the iPhone's world-changing purpose. Its security-first identity won it the most demanding customers on Earth, and left it helpless when those customers decided they would trade a little security for everything else. The very strengths that carried BlackBerry to the summit were the weights that pulled it off the cliff. This is the pattern: body after body, autopsy after autopsy. Success is not a fortress you build and defend. It is a current you must keep swimming against, forever. And the deeper your expertise in the old current, the harder it is to even notice that the river has changed direction. BlackBerry held the future in its hands in 2007. It examined it with the most expert eyes in the industry, and it set it down, certain it was holding a toy. They had everything: tens of millions of devoted users, over $80 billion in value, the most powerful customers in the world, addicted to a device that bore their name, the trust of governments and banks, and the president himself. And they lost almost all of it, not because they could not see what was coming, but because they were too expert, too certain, and too in love with what had made them great to understand that it had just stopped mattering. That was the fatal decision. The body is closed. The cause of death is recorded. And somewhere out there right now, another company full of brilliant experts is holding its own version of that first iPhone, examining its flaws, cataloging its weaknesses, and concluding, with the deep confidence of people who have always been right, that it is nothing to worry about. If this autopsy taught you something, subscribe and stay with us, because next time there will be another body on the table. There always is. I'll see you in the next examination.